Hey guys, tonight we slip into the warm, humid night air of late 18th century Canton. You smell the tang of salt drifting up from the harbor, mingled with the sharper sting of fish guts and tar. Lanterns bob on the water like lazy fireflies. Somewhere, an exhausted boatman snores against his oar. But tonight, instead of leaning safely against a wharf post, you step into the slippery deckboards of a junk boat, drifting closer to a story where the waves don't rock you into a lullaby. They test if you can survive. Spoiler, you probably won't. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're awake enough, drop a comment with your location and the local time. Let's see how wide our little sleepy crew has stretched across the globe. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The docks of Canton stretch like a maze of wooden legs planted in murky water. You trudge through this maze, your sandals slipping, the air thick with smoke from cooking stalls. Canton in the 1780s is a bustling port where silk, tea, and porcelain flow out to foreign merchants while silver and curiosities flow in. It is also a place of sharp divides. Wealthy merchants sipping tea in high-roofed mansions, and barefoot coolies hauling crates until their backs resemble bent fishing poles. Somewhere in between, a sharp-eyed girl drifts like smoke, watching the currents of money and power. That girl is known simply as Shih Xianggu, though history will remember her with a fiercer title, Qing Shih, the Pirate Queen. Her beginnings? Humble enough. Some historians insist she was a simple, flower boat girl, a polite euphemism for women working in floating brothels. Others argue she may have been a servant or minor trader's daughter who knew enough about bargaining to survive. The record is thin, blurred by gossip and the fact that pirates rarely left neat paper trails. What we do know is that young Shih Xianggu had wit sharper than the knives gutting fish on the docks. Imagine her scanning a drunken sailor's pockets before he even realized he'd left his coin pouch unfastened. Picture her listening carefully to traders haggling over silk prices, silently memorizing their tricks, how to pause, when to sigh, the little eye roll that meant, I can't go any lower, even though, of course, they could. If you're looking for a Disney princess origin story, sorry, this one begins with spilled wine, suspicious bargains, and a girl learning that survival means outthinking men twice her size. One mainstream fact historians agree on: Canton in this era was one of the only ports legally open to Europeans under the Qing dynasty. That meant a constant churn of Portuguese, Dutch, and later British traders squeezing into narrow warehouses, filling the streets with strange tongues and even stranger smells, like Stilton cheese left sweating in the sun. For a sharp mind like Shih Xianggu's, the harbor was a classroom of commerce and chaos. Now for a quirkier tidbit. Locals whispered that some women on flower boats could negotiate political secrets as well as silks. Officials, once deep in their cups, would let slip everything from tax schemes to fleet movements. Rumor says young Shih may have been one of those women who didn't just serve wine, but collected information, like seashells. Think of her as a walking early modern intelligence agency, though with more incense smoke and fewer filing cabinets. Historians still argue whether her early years were truly spent on those floating pleasure houses, or whether that detail was later invented to scandalize her memory. After all, labeling a powerful woman as immoral has been a favorite trick of chroniclers for centuries. What's more telling is how every version of her life, no matter how embroidered, circles back to the same point. She learned to twist the power of perception. Smile when necessary, look fragile when useful, and never ever show your full hand until the moment to strike. Picture yourself following her down a dockside alley where shadows clutch at the walls. The sea air carries faint music from a lute. The plucking strings sound both cheerful and just slightly mournful. She stops at a stall selling fried dumplings, watching as sailors slap dice against the tabletop, betting more than their pay. She doesn't waste coins. She watches faces, memorizes who's greedy, who's gullible, and who might be steered like a leaky boat toward her own advantage someday. And yet, despite all the cunning, she's still tethered to a city where women's ambitions are supposed to fold politely into family life. If she'd remained in Canton, she might have become a wife to some dockside merchant, bartering over beans while gossiping about neighbors' laundry. Instead, the tides are already tugging her elsewhere. The sea keeps whispering, promising both ruin and freedom. For now, you stand with her on the harbor's edge. Lantern light gleams across black water. Somewhere sails creak like old bones, and waves slap against hulls as if urging you forward. The girl beside you isn't yet a queen, not yet feared from the South China Sea to Manila Bay. She's just a sharp-eyed survivor with a knack for turning situations upside down. But one chance encounter, one captain crossing her path, will tilt her world from crowded alleys to endless horizons. You don't know it yet, but that man waits just beyond the next bend in the river, with red banners fluttering above his fleet and a reputation sharp enough to cut the night. You're about to step aboard a deck where life will never be small again. The river bends, and you drift into a swirl of lantern light reflecting off the water. Your sandals thump across a gangplank slick with mist, and suddenly you are face to face with Zheng Yi, a man whose name carries weight from Canton to the Vietnamese coast. His jaw is broad, his beard trimmed close, and his eyes glitter the way steel does when you test its edge. If Canton was your classroom, this is the moment you realize the final exam has arrived, except the examiners carry sabers and smell faintly of salt and gunpowder. Zheng Yi is no ordinary sea rover. He comes from a long line of fishermen turned privateers, men who knew that fish and silver swam the same waters if you cast your net wide enough. By the time you cross his path, he already commands a formidable fleet that sails under the blood-red banners that give them their name, the Red Flag Fleet. One historical fact that's hard to ignore: by the early 1800s, this fleet wasn't just a collection of scrappy pirates. It was a floating nation-state with hundreds of ships and thousands of men answering to Zheng Yi's barked orders. The meeting between Shixianggu and Zheng Yi is wrapped in as much fog as the Pearl River itself. Some sources swear he spotted her on a flower boat, impressed not just by her looks, but by her cunning tongue, how she could haggle, flatter, or scold in equal measure. Others suggest she was already dabbling in minor maritime ventures and saw Zheng Yi as an opportunity to trade small stakes for an empire. Historians still argue whether this was romance, convenience, or the coldest kind of business deal dressed up with lanterns and wedding rituals. Either way, what happens next is not a meek transition from dock girl to pirate bride. Shixianggu negotiates. Imagine her standing on the swaying deck, chin lifted, insisting she won't simply warm his bed. She will share his plans, his spoils, and eventually his command. It's a bold demand in a world where most women's futures are stitched into family contracts tighter than a silk robe. Yet Zheng Yi, amused or impressed, or maybe both, agrees. She becomes his partner, not only in name, but in enterprise. Quirky tidbit. Their marriage allegedly included a clause that gave her a direct say in business affairs. Think about that. In a time when most women couldn't sign property contracts without male approval, she secures a cut of pirate profits. It's like convincing Blackbeard to let you manage the treasury while you're still figuring out where to hang your hammock. Under Zheng Yi's wing, you step aboard a floating school of piracy. Lessons come not from dusty scrolls, but from sudden storms, ambushes gone wrong, and the harsh cries of men hoisting sails at midnight. You learn how to read wind by the twitch of a sailcloth, how to judge a merchant's fear by the way he tightens his grip on prayer beads, and how to vanish into a river delta maze where pursuers are left cursing at reeds and shadows. Every evening, Zheng Yi walks the deck, and you trail just a step behind. He's teaching without quite admitting it. He explains which villages are worth squeezing, and which officials can be bribed with tea instead of silver. He shows you how to weigh the loyalty of lieutenants who smile too wide. He points out which European cannons are worth salvaging, and which are more likely to explode than fire. And you, sharp as ever, absorb it all, asking questions that make seasoned sailors smirk at first, then glance nervously when they realize you remember every detail. You even begin to shape crew discipline in small ways. When a drunken pirate stumbles too close, you catch him with words rather than fists, slicing him down to size with sarcasm that leaves the deck laughing and him retreating red-faced. Word spreads. The captain's wife has teeth. Pirates who once snickered at your presence now eye you with wary respect. Zheng Yi sees this too. Instead of snuffing out your influence, he lets it burn. Maybe he recognizes that power isn't a loaf of bread. It grows the more people feed it. Or maybe he's calculating, already guessing that a sharp mind beside him doubles his reach. Whatever the case, your partnership becomes more than just sleeping under the same sails. You're a two-headed command, the beginning of something no dynasty official ever planned for. Still, life is no honeymoon cruise. Storms batter the fleet, and tempers flare like powder sparks. Once, in the middle of the night, sails rip, waves crash, and the fleet scrambles to survive. Zheng Yi bellows orders, but you're there too, shouting for men to cut lines before the mast snaps. Your voice is sharp, clear, and, surprisingly, obeyed. When the storm finally eases, salt clinging to your hair, even the old deckhands nod at you with something closer to recognition than pity. But don't get too comfortable. Storms come in more than one form. Rival pirate bands circle, jealous of the red flag fleet's growing fame. European traders eye you like wolves, sniffing profit. And far inland, Qing dynasty officials grumble that these so-called sea rats are nipping too close to the imperial rice bowl. It's only a matter of time before the empire's gaze turns from courtly squabbles to the woman learning to command storms. For now, though, the river still glitters under lantern light. Zheng Yi leans on the railing, his expression hard to read. He knows ambition when he sees it, and in you he sees a mirror of his own. The sea is wide, the future unwritten, and you are no longer just a survivor from Canton's alleys. You're an apprentice to power, learning to steer not just ships, but men, alliances, and fear itself. And one day soon, when the waves swallow Zheng Yi, you'll step into that vacuum, not with trembling hands, but with a steady grip, ready to turn the fleet into something the world has never seen. The sails above your head snap like thunder, and the Pearl River stretches wide as a gray-blue ribbon. By now, you've walked the planks enough times that the sway of the deck feels less like a threat and more like the rhythm of a lullaby. Though don't mistake comfort for safety. Zheng Yi's fleet grows, the sea grows, and so does the danger. And then one morning, as if the tide itself decided to turn, Zheng Yi is gone. The exact details blur in the mist. Some say a sudden storm tossed him overboard. Others whisper of betrayal or illness, or a twist of fate cruel enough to rob a man at the height of his command. Whatever the cause, you wake one day to find the red flag fleet, hundreds of ships, tens of thousands of men, suddenly a beast without its head. This is the moment when most widows might retreat, perhaps clutching an altar candle and murmuring prayers. But you square your shoulders, and the crew who once saw you as the captain's wife now watch as you step into the open, your eyes steady. Leadership isn't handed to you, it's seized. Imagine the hush on the deck when you announce that Zheng Yi's legacy won't scatter into the waves. You won't just preserve it, you'll enlarge it. One historical fact is striking. The red flag fleet at this point is already so vast that Qing officials call it a floating city, numbering in the hundreds of ships, each packed with armed sailors. In a world where governments controlled armies, here is a pirate queen daring to govern a navy. Historians still argue whether Zheng Yi himself had already intended you to inherit command, or if you simply outmaneuvered rivals with a speed that left them too stunned to resist. And oh, there were rivals. Zheng Yi's lieutenants weren't exactly eager to take orders from a woman. Men with scarred faces and voices roughened by rum challenged your right. That's where your cleverest gamble enters the story. You secure the loyalty of Chung Po Tsai, Zheng Yi's adopted son and favored lieutenant. Through alliance, some say romance, you make sure his backing lends weight to your claim. Suddenly, when you speak, it isn't just you. It's you plus a seasoned commander with ships already tied to his name. One pirate scoffs at your orders, Chung Po Tsai raises an eyebrow, and that scoff dies in his throat. A quirky tidbit. Some records say you sealed this leadership shift by staging a ritual on deck, scattering roasted pig meat and pouring wine as offerings to the sea gods, then boldly declaring your command. Superstitious sailors, who might never obey a woman, were less eager to disobey the gods. Clever, right? You don't just win with sabers, you win with symbols. From that point, you waste no time. The fleet is reorganized with a sharpness that makes even the most disciplined navies look sloppy. You divide the entire red flag fleet into 6 squadrons, each identified by a colored flag. Red for your own command, black, blue, green, yellow, and white for your lieutenants. It's less chaos, more chessboard. Sailors suddenly know who reports to whom, which banner to follow, and what punishments await them if they falter. And you, standing at the center, have built yourself not just a fleet, but an empire floating on wood and canvas. The discipline is fierce. Loot isn't hoarded by greedy captains anymore. It's divided according to strict percentages. A share goes to the central fund, your fund, and from there, resources are distributed to keep loyalty tight. A man who feels cheated might defect. A man who feels he's part of a system fights harder. It's an early form of corporate management, except the employees carry cutlasses and occasionally bite ears off. Historians still argue about how much of this system was invented by you and how much was borrowed from earlier pirate codes. What they can't deny is that under your hand, it solidifies into law. Laws not scribbled on paper, but etched into memory with the threat of execution. Defy the queen, and you might find yourself decapitated, your head bobbing like a grotesque buoy. Steal from the common loot, and your own shipmates might tie you to a cannon as an example. The rules are harsh, but strangely, they create order, and order creates power. And yet, you don't rule only with fear. Sometimes you rule with calculation, granting mercy to those who prove useful, promoting men not by birth or bluster, but by effectiveness. Imagine the surprise of a barefoot fisher lad suddenly raised to officer rank because you noticed his sharp eye in a skirmish. Loyalty bought through recognition often lasts longer than loyalty bought through gold. One night, as the moon lays a silver path across the waves, you stand at the stern of your flagship, the red flag snapping above you. The sailors murmur that the sea itself bends to your will now. You've taken what should have been the fleet's darkest hour, the death of Zheng Yi, and turned it into your coronation. There's a joke somewhere in there. Widows usually get handkerchiefs. You got 6 squadrons and a legend. Still, the seas are restless. Merchants grow more cautious, Qing officials more furious, and Europeans more curious. They all wonder how long this pirate queen can really last. For now, though, as your ships stretch across the horizon like a floating forest, you have turned grief into a navy and widowhood into empire. The red flag fleet no longer sails under Zheng Yi. It sails under you, and the world is only beginning to realize what that means. The fleet is yours now, and the first thing you notice is how messy it looks. Ships of every size and age bob along the Pearl River, some sleek and well-rigged, others patched like quilted jackets. Crews bicker, lieutenants glare at one another, and the air carries more smoke from cooking fires than coordination. If this floating city is going to survive, it needs more than sails and luck. It needs rules, order, and a sense of rhythm, like turning a street brawl into a parade. So you set about forging the red flag fleet into something sharper. One historical fact to anchor this: by 1805, your command stretched to over 300 ships, and within a few years, it would swell to perhaps 1,200, depending on which nervous bureaucrat was counting. That made your fleet not only the largest pirate force in history, but one of the largest naval forces of the era, bigger than some official state navies. And yet, imagine trying to feed, discipline, and coordinate that many men when half of them can't read and the other half think rules are for landlubbers. You start simple: signals. A red flag unfurled from your mast means attack. A quick drop means retreat. Colored lanterns at night flicker like stars, guiding squadrons through fog and moonlight. The other squadrons soon have their own flags: black, blue, white, yellow, green. But everyone knows red means command. When your banner rises, hesitation dies. To keep things uniform, you even standardize drums and gongs so every ship beats the same rhythm. Think of it as pirate Wi-Fi, except instead of lag, you get cannonballs. Of course, men are not flags, and discipline proves trickier. Pirates traditionally value freedom. Loot when you want, drink when you want, nap on deck when you want. You turn that chaos into something almost military. Loot is counted, logged, and distributed according to a system that funnels power back to you. Food stores are rationed. Even weapons are controlled, lest some ambitious lieutenant think he can mount a coup with stolen muskets. You're not just the queen of plunder. You're the quartermaster, judge, and mother of this salty brood. A quirky tidbit slips into the record here. Some stories claim you even arranged ships like floating neighborhoods, assigning men based on family ties, village origins, or even dialect. Imagine drifting through this watery city. One squadron where everyone speaks Hakka, another where Cantonese fills the night air. It's part sociology, part strategy. You reduce fights over language and kinship by clustering them, but you also ensure every community's loyalty is tied directly to your central command. Historians still argue whether you were the true architect of these structures, or whether Zheng Yi had already started sketching them before his death. The truth may be somewhere in between, but what matters is that under your leadership, the loose ropes knot into something tighter. Suddenly, rival bands that once squabbled now march, sail, under a single code. On deck, the effects show quickly. Sailors who once ignored orders snap to attention at the crack of a gong. A merchant convoy, expecting a rabble, instead sees coordinated sails swooping like hawks. The terror isn't just in your numbers, it's in the discipline that makes those numbers bite. And you don't forget symbolism. You make sure your flagship gleams, paint fresh, sails patched in scarlet, deck scrubbed to a shine. Sailors grumble at the work, but secretly they're proud. They know they're part of something greater, something terrifying enough that even foreign navies whisper your name. The first time this new machine flexes its muscles, a cluster of Portuguese traders learns the hard way. Instead of scattered raiding, you move your squadrons in a tight formation, surrounding the convoy like wolves around sheep. Lanterns flash signals, drums echo across the water, and every man knows exactly when to strike. The battle ends quickly, too quickly for the Portuguese to even send word home, and your men, flush with plunder, return to the fleet not just richer, but convinced your rules work. Yet you're not blind to cracks. Discipline, while effective, is brittle. Too much control, and men may mutiny. Too little, and chaos returns. So you walk the decks often, speaking not just as ruler, but as presence. You allow jokes, even the occasional muttered complaint. You let men grumble, then remind them that without your order, they'd be gnawing on empty rice bowls. And with a smirk, you add, "If you think chaos is better, the Qing Navy's always hiring." Cue laughter, tension broken. That balance, fear and humor, harsh law and sly mercy, is what keeps the fleet together. By now, the Red Flag Fleet is more than pirates. It's a society afloat, a state without land, bound not by dynastic decree, but by your will. As night settles, you stand on your flagship's deck. Lanterns sway gently, reflected in black water until it looks like you command both stars above and stars below. Around you, ships line the horizon, sails furled, men resting in hammocks, drums silent for now. Tomorrow may bring storm, battle, or betrayal. But tonight, as your scarlet banner flutters in the breeze, you've achieved something no pirate before dared. You've turned a swarm of outlaws into an empire of the sea, and the world hasn't even begun to reckon with what that means. The fleet hums with new rhythm, but a fleet this vast doesn't survive on sails and cannons alone. You know better than anyone, power rots quickly if it isn't disciplined. So you begin drafting laws, not just suggestions muttered over rum, but actual codes of conduct that ripple through the Red Flag Fleet like scripture. Imagine a floating parliament where you alone are the legislature, judge, and executioner, and the penalty for ignoring your statutes isn't a fine, but a sword. One historical fact that anchors this moment: the pirate code attributed to Qing Shih is among the most detailed of its time, rivaling even the strict rules of the British Navy. These laws weren't whispered. They were shouted, enforced, and feared. Loot, for example, had to be registered before division. Steal a coin from the collective share, and you weren't just docked pay. You could lose your head, quite literally, and your body might be hurled into the sea to remind everyone else what happens when you nibble at the treasury. Yet punishment wasn't only about theft. Rules governed treatment of captives too, women in particular. became a flashpoint. The code states that if a pirate harmed a captured woman against her will, he faced execution. If a pirate took a woman willingly and she consented, then the two had to marry, as if cannonballs could somehow lead to family values. It's both brutal and oddly progressive, at least compared to other pirate fleets where women were usually treated as spoils of war. Historians still argue whether this reflects Qing Shih's personal vision of order or whether it was practical policy. Controlling lust, after all, kept men from turning on each other. A quirky tidbit? Some sailors whispered that flogging was avoided not because it wasn't effective, but because it left men too weak to row. Instead, the fleet favored quick, fatal punishments, efficient in a grim sort of way. Why waste time with lashes when a clean decapitation both solves the problem and entertains the crew with a macabre show? Imagine the awkward silence afterward. Well, who wants dumplings now? The laws extended even to food and supplies. Pirates couldn't just plunder rice or tea and keep it for themselves. Everything had to pass through the central storehouse first, where it was logged and redistributed. Even the boldest raider had to line up like a schoolboy to get his fair share. You can almost hear the groans. Wait, I risked my neck climbing that junk's rigging and now I'm stuck in pirate HR? But order mattered more than fleeting satisfaction. The discipline created an odd culture. Sailors cursed the rules, but also depended on them. They knew they'd eat, they'd get their fair share, and they wouldn't have to fight their bunkmate over who stole whose blanket. Slowly, the Red Flag Fleet became less like a band of thieves and more like a floating commune, albeit one armed with cannons. And rituals began to sprout. Before raids, incense might be burned on the prow, smoke drifting into the dawn while men muttered prayers to sea gods. Superstitions flourished. Never whistle at night. You might summon storms. Never leave chopsticks upright in rice. It's like incense for the dead, tempting fate. And always bow to the red flag before battle. These weren't written into the law, but they became part of the culture, knitting sailors into something like a family. A dysfunctional family, yes, but a family with very sharp knives. Now, were these rules universally loved? Hardly. Men grumbled, cursed under their breath, and sometimes tested boundaries. That's when you stepped in, not with constant executions. Too much blood weakens morale, but with enough examples to remind everyone the rules weren't optional. You balanced terror with order, like a parent who occasionally lets their kids eat sweets, but never skips bedtime. Still, historians puzzle over the contradiction. How could a pirate empire, born from rebellion against Qing authority, thrive on such rigid hierarchy? Perhaps that's the genius of it. On land, rules meant submission to officials who skimmed taxes and demanded bribes. At sea, rules meant survival and fairness, and they were enforced by someone the men respected or feared directly. Picture yourself walking the deck one morning. A man is caught stealing a bit of silver, his hands trembling as he's dragged before you. The crew gathers, silent, waiting. You don't yell. You simply lift your hand, and in a moment, the sentence is carried out. The splash echoes across the water. The crew disperses, quiet but sharper than before. They don't hate you for it. They hate themselves for even considering the same mistake. By nightfall, the fleet hums again. Lanterns swing, rice bowls clink, and someone plucks a lute while dice clatter on a wooden board. A few muttered jokes surface. Obey the code or lose your head. Simple as that. Laughter breaks the tension, because pirates, like anyone else, need to laugh even when fear rules the air. Through law, ritual, and a bit of dark humor, you've transformed pirates into something terrifyingly efficient. They aren't just men with swords. They're men who know exactly what's expected, what's forbidden, and how quickly punishment falls. The seas no longer see a mob of looters. They see a society that sails beneath one banner, guided by one code, and ruled by one queen. Now that discipline has hardened your floating empire into something more formidable than mere brigands. The world begins to notice. The Red Flag Fleet is no longer just an irritation nibbling at trade routes. It's an existential threat to the Qing dynasty's maritime economy. And here is where the story drifts into a strange paradox. The very forces meant to suppress you, in trying to stop you, only confirm your legend. First, the merchants. Junks heavy with tea, silk, or porcelain, once content to glide along the South China Sea, now tremble at the thought of your red banners unfurling on the horizon. Trade caravans on water begin to bunch together, hoping that strength in numbers will deter you. Spoiler, it doesn't. You simply surround them with dozens of your own ships until their captains are forced to choose between surrender or sinking. Many merchants quietly make deals, offering tribute in advance. Historians suggest that at the height of your reign, you operated almost like a maritime tax authority, an outlaw IRS with cannons. Second, the Qing Navy. Once upon a time, it was considered respectable, a force capable of patrolling coasts and projecting imperial power. But when they met you, catastrophe. You didn't just defeat them in skirmishes, you annihilated entire squadrons. One Qing admiral, sent to humble you, returned in disgrace after losing dozens of ships. Imagine his awkward debriefing. Yes, Your Majesty, the pirates are, better at being a navy than the navy. That humiliation stuck, like a stain on silk. Some officers even abandoned their posts, knowing that to face you was to court disaster. The dynasty tried hiring mercenaries, Portuguese gunners, even British privateers, to supplement their weakness. Yet the irony is rich. European sailors, trained to respect naval codes, found themselves flustered by your swarm tactics. Their cannon discipline meant little when your ships darted in from all angles, like hornets around a lumbering ox. One British observer supposedly remarked that your fleet moved with the coordination of a school of fish, every flick synchronized, every ship flowing as if guided by a single mind. That mind, of course, was yours. Meanwhile, coastal villages felt your presence in other ways. Some lived in dread, fearing raids. Others flourished because aligning with you meant protection. You became a paradoxical guardian, terror for those who resisted, shield for those who cooperated. Oral histories tell of villagers offering rice and fish in exchange for your flag flying near their harbors, a crimson insurance policy against rival bands. In time, red flag protection carried more weight than imperial decrees. And let's not forget the bureaucrats. The mandarins in Beijing shuffled reports across their desks, each one more desperate than the last. The pirates have blockaded Canton. The pirates have defeated another squadron. The pirates are taxing the Pearl River Delta. One imagines an exhausted scribe pausing to sip tea, muttering, "Perhaps we should just hire her?" The strangest part? Your enemies weren't always faceless officials. Sometimes they were former allies, pirates who balked at your strict code and tried to carve out rival fiefdoms. But rebellion within the fleet rarely ended well. A mutinous captain might muster a few ships, only to find himself surrounded by 100. Your strategy was ruthless but pragmatic. Fold the survivors back into your command, remind them of the code, and move on. Order was restored not by mercy, but by inevitability. Now imagine a battle scene, mid-ocean. The sky darkens with storm clouds, waves crash high, and two fleets converge. Your ships weave in tight arcs, sails snapping, drums pounding from deck to deck to keep rhythm. The enemy forms a line of battle, their cannons booming. Yet your ships absorb the blows, darting close to lash grappling hooks and send men scrambling over railings. Within hours, the sea is littered with debris, floating oars, shattered hulls, and the eerie silence of defeat. Survivors are plucked from the waves, not for mercy, but for conscription. Every battle doesn't just expand your reputation, it expands your fleet. And what of you during these moments? Contemporary accounts are scarce, but folklore fills the gap. Some say you stood at the prow in crimson robes, utterly calm, as cannon smoke swirled around you. Others whisper that you consulted fortune tellers before each raid, aligning battles with auspicious tides and constellations. True or not, the myth mattered as much as reality. Soldiers fight harder when they believe their leader carries fate itself in her hands. It is here, in the clash of steel and surf, that your paradox deepens. The more powerful you become, the less pirate-like you seem. Pirates are supposed to be lawless. Pirates are supposed to be hunted. Yet your empire grows organized, structured, and oddly predictable. You don't just prey on ships. You dictate the very rhythm of maritime life. When merchants adjust their schedules to avoid you, when navies falter at the mere rumor of your sails, when officials draft policies around your shadow, at that point, you've ceased to be merely a pirate. You've become a state without land. And the strangest thought of all, for a fleeting moment in history, the South China Sea belonged not to emperors or governors, not to merchant guilds or foreign traders, but to you. With every victory, you discover that power on the sea is not just about plunder or intimidation. It's about creating systems that can outlast a single storm. So you, the supposed pirate queen, begin doing something unexpected. You set up what looks suspiciously like government, not a whimsical, let's all vote on where to sail democracy, but a coldly efficient bureaucracy, your own floating state. First comes taxation, not the clumsy, corrupt style the Qing dynasty perfected on land, but a clear, terrifyingly effective version. Every merchant ship passing through your waters is given a choice: pay tribute and sail under red flag protection, or resist and likely be captured, dismantled, and absorbed. The tribute could be in silver, silk, or even barrels of rice, whatever fueled your growing empire. Imagine a traveling merchant, nervously handing over coins, only to receive a stamped wooden token granting him safe passage. That token, a piece of pirate paper, carried more weight in some harbors than imperial edicts. Historians still argue whether this was piracy disguised as government or government disguised as piracy. Second comes logistics. You don't just scatter your fleet along the horizon like wild seagulls. You assign zones, establish patrol routes, and enforce schedules. Supply ships transport food, fresh water, and weapons between divisions. Repair crews patch up hulls and mend sails with assembly line precision. And the harbors you control become safe havens, islands turned into rest stops, floating arsenals, even makeshift marketplaces where captured goods are cataloged and redistributed. A fringe detail often overlooked is the existence of floating granaries, ships packed with nothing but sacks of rice, like cereal barges drifting through your empire. Not exactly glamorous, but without them, your naval machine would starve. Third, law. Your fleet code was already strict, but as your empire expands, you formalize it further. theft from the common treasury, execution, unauthorized shore leave, severe whipping, and heaven help the sailor who assaulted a woman, whether villager or captive. The punishment was death, swift and unceremonious. Many modern historians argue that your code, brutal though it was, created an unusual sense of stability in a profession infamous for chaos. Where Western pirates embraced anarchy and drunken mutiny, you built a legal framework. One might even call it, gasp, boring. But boring is exactly what sustains power when you're managing tens of thousands of men. Now, let's talk about money. Spoils from raids are divided with surgical precision. One portion for the central treasury, another portion shared among the crews. But the real genius lies in your reserve funds. You keep silver stocked for emergencies, ensuring that in a bad season, your men still get paid. Picture the scene. Sailors receiving their monthly allotment not in rum or vague promises, but in actual coins. That predictability bred loyalty. After all, why defect to the Qing Navy, where wages were often delayed or embezzled, when under you, payday always arrived on time? And while your empire is maritime, its tendrils creep inland. Coastal markets adapt to your economy. Villagers trade directly with your fleet, sometimes smuggling goods under the noses of imperial officials. Scholars still debate whether certain local governors secretly collaborated with you, pocketing pirate tribute in exchange for looking the other way. After all, it's easier to survive when you quietly acknowledge who actually controls the sea. Then comes the element of myth-making. Your administration wasn't just about silver and rice, it was about fear. You allow stories of your ruthlessness to spread unchecked. The captured ships set ablaze, the deserters executed, the unlucky captains made examples of. Yet curiously, you also cultivate an image of fairness. Merchants who pay the tribute live to tell of safe voyages. Fishermen under your protection boast of plentiful catches. Over time, the legend crystallizes. You are not merely a pirate, you are an alternative sovereign. And let's pause for a small joke here. Imagine if modern governments ran like your fleet. Forget waiting in line at the DMV. If you forgot your paperwork, you'd risk a flogging. On the upside, at least potholes would get fixed faster. But the strangest twist of all is that your empire operates without land. You hold no permanent cities, no castles, no fortresses, only the decks of ships and the loyalty of men. Yet you function as if you were a kingdom adrift, your red banners flapping like royal standards. Historians scratch their heads at this. Some call it proto-anarchism, others call it floating feudalism. But to you, labels don't matter. What matters is control. And so, night after night, when you stand on the deck gazing at lanterns bobbing across 1,000 hulls, you know you've built something extraordinary. The Qing dynasty, with its palaces and porcelain, claims the land. But you claim the waves. And in that moment, the sea itself feels like your throne. By now, you've turned a ragged confederation of pirates into a streamlined empire afloat, and word of your exploits has traveled far beyond the Chinese coast. And so, naturally, you attract a brand new category of trouble. Foreign powers. European empires, Britain, Portugal, even the French, begin eyeing your sea lanes with that colonial squint, as if deciding whether to treat you like a business rival, a military threat, or an eccentric neighbor whose music is too loud. Let's start with the Portuguese. Their Macau colony is the closest European outpost to your waters, a tiny foothold but rich with cannons and trading links. The Portuguese Navy is no stranger to Asian waters, but when they cross paths with you, they realize quickly that your fleet isn't some scrappy nuisance. You swarm them with the same coordinated tactics you used against the Qing. In one infamous clash, Portuguese ships reportedly fired until their cannons overheated, yet still couldn't break through your lines. The official reports say you retreated. Folk stories insist you won. Historians still argue whether this battle was a stalemate or a quiet humiliation for Portugal. Either way, it added another jewel to your reputation. Then there are the British. Fresh from their growing influence in India and eager to pry open China's trade, they keep a wary eye on your fleet. British captains pen reports about you in clipped handwriting, describing your empire as a serious impediment to commerce. One merchant captain supposedly remarked that the Red Flag fleet was more punctual in their tax collection than any crown authority. That might be the most backhanded pirate compliment in history. Meanwhile, the French float in at the edges, curious but hesitant. Some speculate that French traders secretly negotiated with your fleet to move goods under your safe passage system, preferring your predictable discipline over the chaotic dangers of smuggling routes. A quirky tidbit. There are rumors that French Catholic missionaries even encountered your men, trying to spread the gospel on pirate decks. Whether they succeeded or simply received a polite mercy, but no one knows. Foreign merchants often preferred bribery over battle. They'd load up a chest of silver or fine textiles presented as a gift and hope you would grant them passage. In essence, you transformed the South China Sea into a toll road. The difference? On land, a toll booth is a wooden gate. On water, the toll is demanded by an armada that can materialize on the horizon with the suddenness of a summer storm. But clashes weren't only military. There was also a battle of perception. European newspapers, hungry for exotic tales, began publishing sensational stories about a Chinese pirate queen with tens of thousands of men. Some painted you as a bloodthirsty villainess. Others, oddly enough, admired your discipline and genius. One London broadsheet described you as a female Caesar of the Orient. Another mocked the Qing dynasty for being outmaneuvered by a woman. Imagine sipping tea in London, reading about you, and thinking, well, if the British Navy can't stop her, at least she's punctual. Now picture the cultural friction. Europeans arrive expecting rigid rules of engagement, lines of cannon, and gentlemanly warfare. Instead, they face your unpredictable strikes, your habit of capturing ships intact, your willingness to incorporate enemies into your fleet rather than destroy them outright. To them, this was dishonorable. To you, it was efficiency. One Portuguese chronicler sputtered that your fleet fought like insects. What he meant as an insult was, in fact, a grudging recognition of your swarm tactics. Overwhelming, coordinated, relentless. The foreign powers also brought something you couldn't ignore: technology. Western ships often carried heavier cannons, built with steel reinforcements that could tear holes through wooden hulls. Yet you adapted by increasing mobility, using shallower draft junks that darted where deep-keeled frigates couldn't follow. At times, you'd lure foreign ships into river mouths or narrow straits, where their size became a disadvantage. Think of it as the naval equivalent of outmaneuvering a tank with a fleet of motorbikes. And here's where things get almost comical. European merchants sometimes requested double insurance. They'd pay the Qing officials for an imperial license and then quietly pay your fleet for safe passage, effectively covering both sides. Imagine being a trader with your ledger showing two line items, official tax and pirate tax, and realizing that only one of those receipts would actually keep you alive. What's extraordinary is how you managed to keep all these forces balanced. You never tried to conquer Macau, never launched reckless wars against European empires. You knew the limits of your power. Instead, you stayed focused on what mattered: control of trade in your waters. Let the Europeans squabble over colonies and treaties. You carved out a kingdom invisible on maps, but tangible on the sea. So as night falls and you lean against the ship's rail, the lanterns of your fleet glowing like a drifting city, you know that the world beyond your horizon is watching. Empires that stretch across continents are taking notes, fretting, scheming. And the most amusing part? For all their wealth and firepower, they can't quite figure out how to deal with you. You've fended off navies, cowed merchants, and stared down European powers without flinching. But the greatest threat to your floating empire isn't always foreign. It often comes from within. When you're commanding tens of thousands of restless sailors spread across hundreds of ships, unity is a fragile illusion, and cracks, once they appear, widen quickly in the salt air. The first whispers of rebellion often start small. A captain grumbles that the profit shares are unfair. Another resents being folded into the red flag fleet after losing to you in battle, and dreams of clawing back independence. Some resent the rigid discipline, the whippings, the executions, the endless rules. After all, pirates are supposed to be free spirits, not clock-punching employees of a floating bureaucracy. But under your rule, a pirate ship feels less like a tavern brawl and more like a stern office where the HR department carries swords. One famous crack comes with the so-called Black Flag Fleet. Originally allies, they bristle under your dominance, their leaders resenting how thoroughly you've absorbed their identity. Eventually, they splinter off, trying to assert independence in the same waters you dominate. The results? Predictably disastrous. You surround them, defeat them, and either fold their crews back into your ranks or scatter them to the winds. Historians still argue whether this was a real civil war or just a brief flare-up of insubordination. But to your sailors, it was a cautionary tale. Don't defy the queen, or you'll end up dinner for the fish. Then there's the problem of captains growing too ambitious. A few try to raid villages without your approval, breaking the fleet code. Others skim from the treasury or gamble away spoils. Your response is swift and merciless. Public executions, sometimes with entire crews watching, the sea breeze carrying the scent of iron and salt. One quirky rumor says you kept a special execution ship, a kind of floating stage, just to make examples. Whether or not it's true, the legend alone kept captains in line. And yet, mutiny is never fully avoidable. Imagine standing on a dark deck, lantern light flickering across suspicious faces. A group of sailors whisper at the stern, knives glinting under their sleeves. They don't dare strike directly at you, your authority is too entrenched, but they might strike at your lieutenants, hoping to fracture the chain of command. You counter with spies. Every fleet division has informants, reporting back on gossip, complaints, and half-formed plots. It's like running a medieval intelligence agency, except everyone smells of fish and tar. The irony is that your ruthlessness, while effective, feeds the myth that you are untouchable. Sailors begin to believe you can sense disloyalty before it even sparks. "Don't talk ill of the mistress," they mutter. "Her eyes are everywhere." Whether this is superstition or savvy propaganda hardly matters. It works. Of course, enforcing discipline doesn't always mean cruelty. You know when to reward loyalty. Captains who prove themselves in battle are promoted, sometimes gifted captured ships as prizes. Crews who hold fast during storms are granted extra rations of rice wine. These small gestures remind your men that obedience brings not only survival, but prosperity. And let's be honest, nothing soothes a restless sailor like rice wine at the end of a long raid. But even as you quash mutinies, you sense the fragility of empire. Your fleet is massive, but its loyalty depends on constant victories, constant spoils. A single prolonged famine or a string of defeats could unravel everything. Historians still debate whether this reliance on momentum was your greatest strength or your Achilles heel. After all, how long can you keep thousands of men fed, paid, and satisfied when the world is arrayed against you? Here's a little light joke for you. Running the Red Flag Fleet is basically like running a startup. At first, everyone's excited about innovation and plunder. Then the meetings start. People argue about shares, and suddenly you're just another boss reminding everyone not to steal office supplies. Except in your case, the supplies are cannons. And so, night after night, you pace the deck, lantern swinging at your side, listening to the creak of ropes and the murmurs of sailors. You know rebellion is always lurking, a shadow at the edge of your empire. But you also know this: fear, loyalty, and silver are stronger bonds than freedom ever was. You've turned pirates into soldiers, soldiers into subjects, and subjects into believers. For now, at least, the red flag still flies unchallenged. Your fleet is at its zenith now. Tens of thousands of sailors, hundreds of ships, and a reputation so heavy it weighs on every ripple of the South China Sea. But empires, even floating ones, always reach a tipping point. For you, it arrives as the Qing dynasty finally decides, enough is enough. No more embarrassed admirals slinking home. No more reports of pirate taxation. No more empire within an empire. The imperial court begins to mobilize in earnest. The Qing Navy launches campaigns with renewed determination, bolstered by foreign mercenaries who smell silver in the water. Portuguese gunners, British adventurers, even Dutch traders lend their firepower. The empire understands that to restore credibility, they must crush you publicly. A quiet bribe won't suffice. They need spectacle, a victory sung in court halls and etched into history scrolls. And so, the great confrontations begin. One of the most infamous occurs in 1809 at the Battle of the Tiger's Mouth, a narrow strait near Canton. Your fleet, sprawling and confident, is drawn into a clash with combined Qing and Portuguese forces. The battle stretches for days, ships lashing together, cannon smoke choking the sky, the sea littered with splintered wood. At one point, records claim the Portuguese even chained their ships together to form a floating wall, daring you to break it. Did you? Accounts differ. Some say you battered them until the chains snapped. Others insist you withdrew in tactical order, saving your strength for another day. Historians still argue whether this was your finest stand or the first sign of overextension. But the pattern is clear. The pressure on your fleet begins to mount. You can't raid with the same freedom anymore. Merchant convoys tighten their defenses. Imperial patrols grow bolder. Foreign cannons bite deeper into your hulls. Even storms seem crueler, scattering your ships at the worst possible moments. For the first time, whispers spread, not of rebellion, but of fatigue. Your men wonder if the tide, once always at your back, is starting to turn. Yet you are not simply a warrior. You are a strategist. You avoid suicidal battles, retreating when necessary, regrouping your forces with the same discipline you once instilled. You remind your sailors that survival, not glory, sustains an empire. And in this grim calculus, you begin to weigh a question pirates are never supposed to ask. How does this end? A quirky detail from these campaigns. One chronicle describes your fleet setting fires on the shoreline at night, making it appear as though villages were aflame, luring enemy ships into chaos. Whether true or apocryphal, it illustrates your genius for psychological warfare. Another account mentions your men releasing oil into the sea and setting it alight, creating floating walls of fire to trap imperial vessels. Imagine the eerie glow. Flames crawling across water, sails silhouetted like shadows in a nightmare. But here's the joke hiding in all this doom. For all their pomp, the Qing officials still struggled to coordinate their campaigns. While you're running a pirate empire, like a Fortune 500 company, they're essentially the equivalent of a group project where everyone forgot the deadline. In some battles, rival admirals even sabotaged one another, fearing that another success would eclipse their own. So while you felt the squeeze, your enemies were hardly the picture of unity either. Still, the inevitability of attrition presses down. The Red Flag Fleet, once so invincible, cannot remain untouchable forever. Grain stores thin, silver coffers shrink, storms scatter ships faster than you can regroup them, and in every port rumors swell. The Pirate Queen is cornered. The Pirate Queen is losing her grip. The Pirate Queen is finally mortal. Yet even here, in the gathering gloom, you remain poised. You stand on deck as dusk bleeds into night, the waves reflecting the dim glow of lanterns. Your men watch you, searching for signs of fear, but your face is calm. The world may think it is closing in, but you know something they don't. Surrender, when chosen on your own terms, can be as powerful as victory. The storms of battle have battered your fleet. The Qing dynasty has poured silver into crushing you, and foreign cannons have finally begun tipping the balance. You stand at the prow one night, hair whipped by the salt wind, staring at the horizon. And for the first time since you claimed command, you feel the weight of inevitability. No empire lasts forever, not on land, not on sea, and especially not when it floats precariously on wooden planks and borrowed loyalties. But here's where your story veers from the bloody fate of most pirates. While Blackbeard's head ends up on a pike, and countless nameless captains vanish into the deep, you do something almost unheard of. You negotiate your way out. No blaze of cannon fire, no tragic last stand. You, history's most feared pirate queen, walk away. It begins with quiet overtures. The Qing dynasty, exhausted and embarrassed, realizes that crushing you outright might take years and more silver than the empire can spare. Their coastal trade has been strangled for too long, their navy demoralized, their prestige shredded. So, astonishingly, officials consider another path: amnesty. If you'll lay down your arms, if you'll disband your fleet, they'll grant you pardon. Historians still argue whether this was desperation on the Qing's part or a stroke of your genius. After all, it wasn't them dictating terms, it was you. The records show that you marched directly into the Governor General's office in Canton, not as a prisoner, but as a negotiator, dressed not in rags, but in dignity. Picture the scene. Mandarins in their stiff robes shifting uncomfortably as you, the so-called scourge of the South China Sea, bow politely and then lay out your conditions. And oh, the conditions. Amnesty for your men, amnesty for your officers, and not the kind where they're quietly executed later, but genuine pardons that allow them to reintegrate into society. Incredibly, the Qing officials agree. More than 17,000 of your sailors walk away free men. Many even offered positions in the Imperial Navy. It's the largest mass pardon of pirates in recorded history. But you don't stop there. You secure your own future. You demand to keep your personal fortune, plunder amassed from years of raids, enough silver and silk to make you comfortable for life. Again, the officials concede. A quirky detail hidden in some accounts. You even negotiated permission to keep a handful of ships, as if retiring with your own little yacht club. The most astonishing part? You retire openly, not skulking in the shadows, not hiding under false names. You live in Canton, later running a gambling house. From pirate queen to casino manager, if that isn't a career pivot worthy of LinkedIn, what is? Some say you raised a family, living into your 60s or 70s, a quiet matron whose past life was whispered about in taverns but never punished. Scholars scratch their heads at this ending. How does the most feared pirate queen in history stroll into retirement like a satisfied merchant? Some insist the Qing dynasty was too weak to risk another conflict. Others argue that you were simply too shrewd, too calculating, to leave them any better choice. Whatever the truth, you managed what no pirate before or since has achieved. A peaceful exit. And here's your light joke. Most pirates dream of treasure buried under X marks the spot. You basically buried yours in a retirement fund. Forget parrots and wooden legs. Your legacy is a pension plan. When you close your eyes at night in retirement, the sea must still echo in your dreams. The roll of the deck, the roar of cannon fire, the crimson banners snapping in the wind. You know that history will never forget you. Not because you fought to the death, but because you were clever enough to stop fighting before the sea swallowed you whole. And so, your legend drifts into that hazy twilight space between history and myth. The Chronicles list your name among the fiercest pirates of all time, but your story is different. Blackbeard dies with a dozen musket balls in him. Bartholomew Roberts goes down in a blaze of grape shot. But you end with a full purse, a safe bed, and no hangman's noose. In the candlelight of your retirement, you hear the stories sailors whisper in the taverns. They tell them louder when they think you're not listening. Some say you commanded storms with a flick of your hand. Others insist you had a pact with sea demons, that no cannonball could ever strike you unless you permitted it. A few even believe you were a ghost all along, sent by the ocean to remind empires how fragile their grip on trade truly was. But you know the truth, and it's far simpler. You weren't a demon. You weren't a ghost. You were a woman who understood two things better than almost anyone else in history: how power worked and how to bend it in your favor. Empires rise and fall, generals come and go, but for a brief, shining moment, you bent an empire to its knees without ever wearing a crown. When scholars lecture about you now, they struggle with labels: pirate, warlord, admiral, diplomat, none quite fit. You weren't just a thief, though you stole. You weren't merely a soldier, though you commanded. You weren't only a wife, a widow, or a madam, though you played each role when it suited you. You were all of them and more, and that is why your story endures. And here's a gentle, sleepy thought to carry you further into rest. Picture the South China Sea at dawn, not filled with war cries and cannon smoke, but quiet. The waves lap against the hull of a ship at anchor. The sails, once crimson with menace, now lie folded, resting. The sea itself seems to sigh, as if relieved that, for now, it is free of war. You may drift to sleep imagining the sound of rigging swaying gently, of gulls calling overhead. Imagine sitting on the deck of one of your ships in this quiet moment. No enemies on the horizon, only the slow rocking of the sea. The water glitters like silk, the kind you once taxed by force, now shimmering peacefully under the sun. And in that stillness, there's a lesson. You don't always need to win by fire and fury. Sometimes the cleverest victory is knowing when to stop, when to walk away, and when to let the waves carry you to shore. As you drift off, remember, the most powerful pirate in history didn't die with a cutlass in her hand. She died with peace in her heart. And maybe that's the most rebellious act of all. So let the sea cradle you tonight. Let the rhythm of the waves guide your breathing, slow and deep, until you too drift into your own gentle harbor of rest.